From. I have died once already, so I know exactly how it feels. It is not like sleep, it is like being lowered into cold water an inch at a time by hands that have already let go. The train pulls out of Qingyang Station at 6:40 in the morning. From. The way it always did, the way it did the last time, and I am standing on the platform watching John's face behind the smeared glass, and he is smiling at me the way a man smiles when he thinks he has won. From. He does not know that I have his whole life in my hands like a bird with a broken wing. The steam from the vendor's cart smells of star anise and pork fat. And somewhere down the platform a child is crying because he dropped his egg. From. And the loudspeaker is telling us to mind the gap, and I am 19 years old again with my whole ruin still ahead of me. Or behind me. I have stopped being able to tell which direction time runs. John presses his palm flat to the glass. From. His mouth shapes my name, Mary. Mary, get on, you're going to miss. Last time I got on. Last time I climbed the metal steps with my one canvas bag, and my father's photograph wrapped in a handkerchief. From. And I sat beside this man and let him hold my hand all the way to a city I did not know, and I did not come back for 3 years. And by the time I came back everything my father left me was gone and my mother was a name carved into stone. From. This time I stand very still on the platform and I let the doors close between us. His smile does not fall right away. That is the part I want to remember forever. How long it takes for a lie to understand it has been caught. From. His hand is still on the glass. The train shudders and begins to move, and his face slides sideways out of the frame of the window, and only then, only when the physics of it becomes undeniable, does his mouth open into a shape of real fear. From. I lift my hand. Not to wave, just to let him see it empty. To let him see that I am not holding anything of his anymore. The train takes him away down the long gray throat of the valley, and I stand alone in the anise-smelling cold. From. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes my hands are perfectly steady. I have work to do before the day is over. My father has been dead for 11 days. From. And there is 300,000 yuan sitting in an account that 4 different people are already spending in their minds. And I am the only one of them who knows how this story ends. Let's me tell you how I died the first time. From. So you understand why I am so calm. I want to be exact about it, because exactness is the only thing I have that they don't. They have money and voices and the trust of an entire village. I have the truth in the correct order. From. And that turns out to be worth more than all of it, though it took me dying to learn it. My father was a man who fixed things. Roads, mostly. He ran a small road-laying crew for the county. From. And in the wet season he patched the mountain passes that the rains chewed apart every year. He was not a clever man in the way the village measured cleverness. He did not scheme. He paid his workers on the day he said he would. From. Even the month the concrete supplier cheated him, and he had to borrow to do it. My father borrowed a great deal, quietly, over many years, the way honest men do when they refuse to let anyone go unpaid. From. I did not know the size of those debts while he lived. I learned it the way I learned everything important. Too late, the first time. He died on the Fuyang Road in the 4th month. From. When a section of hillside came down in the rain and took his truck with it. The county called it an accident. The county paid a death compensation of 300,000 yuan because he died on county work. From. And that money. I need you to hold this in your mind the way I hold it. That money was mine, his daughter's. There was no one else. My mother was his wife, yes, but by the custom of our village and the letter of the papers. From. The compensation was to pass to his direct blood, and I was his only child. 300,000 yuan. In our village that was not money, that was a life. That was the difference between a girl who could go to the city and study and become something. From. And a girl who married whoever her uncles pointed at and spent 40 years bent over as a rice terrace. My father had 2 brothers. In our family we did not use their given names. We called them second uncle and third uncle by the order of their birth. From. And my father was the eldest, the one who paid for the other 2 to go to school, the one who bought second uncle his first motorbike and lent third uncle the deposit on his house and never once, not once, asked for any of it back. From. I want to describe them to you properly, because it would be easy for me to make them into cartoons, and cartoons cannot hurt you, and I need you to feel how much these men could hurt. Second uncle was fat and warm and funny. From. He was the one who slipped me candy at the New Year and told me I was the prettiest girl in 3 villages. When my father was alive, second uncle laughed the loudest at his jokes. From. He had a way of putting his hand on your shoulder that made you feel chosen. Third uncle was thin and quiet and clever, and he kept the accounts for half the village. From. And people trusted him with their money the way you trust the one relative who went to secondary school in the city. He wore glasses he did not need, I think, because they made him look honest. Between them, in the 11 days after my father died. From. They built a machine to take everything, and the cruelest gear in that machine was a boy I loved. I met John at the county market when I was 17. He sold phone cases and screen protectors from a folding table. From. And he had a smile that made the other girls slow down when they walked past, and when he turned that smile on me I felt the whole crowded market go quiet. The way a room goes quiet when someone important enters. That is how I thought of it then. From. that his attention made me important. He was 2 years older. He had a motorbike and a leather jacket he could not really afford, and a mother who watched me across a table with the flat, patient eyes of a woman pricing livestock. I did not understand that look the first time. I understood it perfectly the second. For 2 years John was gentle with me. That is the part that took me longest to forgive myself for. That he was not cruel, not once. In the years before he needed to be. He remembered the flower I liked. He waited outside my school gate in the rain. He told me about the shop he would open in the city, the two of us behind the counter, our children doing homework in the back. He built a whole life in the air between us and let me live in it, and I did not know that the entire structure had been commissioned by other men. Here is the memory I go back to most. 11 days after my father died. John came to me at the ancestral hall, where the mourning mats were still laid out, where the white paper still hung, where the incense had burned down to a gray rope of ash. He came in the evening when the mourners had gone home, and he sat beside me on the cold stone step, and he took my hand and he said the thing that undid me. Your uncles are going to eat you alive, he said. You know that. The moment the money comes, they'll circle you like dogs at a butcher's. I remember I started crying, because he had said aloud the thing I had been too frightened to think. Come with me, he said. Come to the city, we'll marry there quietly, just us. Once you're my wife, the money is ours, not theirs. They can't touch a married woman's household, let them shout at an empty house. And I believed him. God help the girl I was, I believed every word. Because it was exactly what I needed to hear, and it came in the voice of the person I trusted most in the world. What I did not know, what I would not know until I was dying 2 years later in a room that stank of iron and cheap disinfectant, was that my uncles had paid him 30,000 yuan, second uncle's money and third uncle's arithmetic, to take me away. To get me off the land and out of the village and far from any official who might ask the daughter of the deceased where she wished the compensation to go. A married woman who has eloped has, in the eyes of the village, chosen her side. She has left. She has forfeited her standing. My uncles did not need to steal the money from me by force. They only needed me gone long enough that the paperwork could be quietly redirected through third uncle's careful, honest-looking hands. With my mother, a grieving widow with no head for accounts, pressed to sign whatever was put before her. The genius of it, and I can call it genius now because I am no longer its victim, was that it cost them nothing to break. If I refused John, they had lost 30,000 and gained a suspicious niece. If I went with him, they had bought my entire inheritance for the price of a used car. I went with him. That is the memory. The cold step, the ash, his hand around mine, and my own voice saying, yes, yes, take me away from them, as if he were the shore and not the water closing over my head. I will tell you how it ended the first time, and then I will not speak of it again, because I did not come back to relive it. I came back to make sure it never happens. We married in the city with 2 strangers as witnesses. John's mother came to live with us within the month. The shop he had promised never opened. There was always a reason, a permit, a landlord, a cousin who cheated him. The money my uncle sent him, my money, laundered through my own marriage, went into his mother's account and then into things I never saw. I worked in a garment factory 12 hours a day. I got pregnant in the 2nd year. The child came early, in the 9th month, in the small hours, and something tore inside me that should not have torn, and I was bleeding in a way that even I, who knew nothing, understood was wrong. The clinic near our building could not stop it. They said I needed the county hospital, needed surgery, needed blood, and it would cost, I remember the number, I will always remember the number, it would cost 18,000 yuan they wanted as a deposit before they would begin. 18,000 yuan. Out of 300,000 that had been mine, John's mother stood in the corridor under a flickering tube light, and she did the arithmetic out loud, the way third uncle would have, and she said to her son, not quietly, not caring that I could hear, the girl or the money, if she lives she'll want to know where it all went. Let nature decide. And John looked at me on the gurney, and I watched him choose, and he chose the way water chooses the low ground. He said they didn't have it. He said we'd try the free ward. He said a great many things, and I stopped hearing them, because the cold water had reached my chin by then. I bled to death on a corridor trolley at 4:12 in the morning while a nurse argued with an administrator about a deposit. The last thing I saw clearly was the flickering tube light, on and off, like something trying to send me a message it could not finish spelling. And my mother, I learned this from the other side, the way you learn things when you are between one life and the next. My mother had heard, somehow, that I was in trouble, and she had begged a ride from a neighbor and set out on the mountain road in the dark and the rain to reach me. She never arrived. The Fuyang road took her the same way it took my father. Mother and daughter and husband, all 3 of us dead within 2 years, and 300,000 yuan spread comfortably across the lives of the people who arranged it. That is the whole account. I have set it down in the correct order. from. Now let me tell you what I am going to do with it. I woke on the platform, not in a bed, not in a bright light, not with any ceremony. I simply was there again, 19, my canvas bag in my hand, my father 11 days dead, from. John's face behind the glass and the whole ruin still folded up and unused in front of me, like a road that hasn't been driven. I did not scream. I did not faint. I want you to notice that, because it matters, from. The girl I was would have wept and clutched the man and gotten on the train. But I am not that girl anymore. I am a woman who bled out on a corridor trolley, and there is a coldness in me now that the living do not have, from. When you have already lost everything once, fear loses its grip on you. What is there to be afraid of? The worst thing has already happened. I am simply here to make sure it doesn't happen twice, so I let the doors close, and I let him go, from. And I turned and walked back down the platform steps into the gray morning, and I began very quietly to think. The first thing I did was inventory. Not revenge, inventory. Revenge is what fools reach for first, from. And fools reaching for revenge get caught. Before you move, you count. You count what you have, you count what they have, and above all, you count what they believe, because a man's beliefs are the levers you pull him by, from. And my uncles believed a great many convenient things. What I had 11 days of time, which was more than it sounds, because the compensation had not yet been paid out. The county worked slowly. The money was approved but not dispersed, from. That was the whole game, right there, sitting in a government office waiting for signatures. Whoever controlled the paperwork controlled the 300,000. What I had also so, a mother still alive. This is the thing I had to keep pressing down, from. The joy of it, because joy makes you careless. My mother was alive. She was at home, grieving, fragile, easily led, the same woman my uncles would use as a signature stamp in the life I remembered. If I was going to protect anything, from. I had to protect her first, because in the version I remembered they moved her like a chess piece, precisely because no one had thought to defend her. What I had, most of all, a map of the future drawn in my own blood, from. I knew every move before they made it. I knew second uncle would come first, warm and laughing, to soften me. I knew third uncle would come after, with papers, to close me. I knew John was already bought, from. I knew the exact shape of the trap because I had died in it. What they had, the trust of the village. Face, third uncle's reputation as an honest keeper of accounts, second uncle's easy charm. My youth, which everyone read as weakness. My grief, from, which everyone expected to make me pliable. And a plan so smooth that it required no violence, no theft anyone could point to. Just a girl gently steered off her own land while the numbers were quietly rearranged what they believed, from. That I was 17 in the ways that mattered, that I did not understand money or law or men, that my father's debts were a private disaster no one outside the family knew the true size of, that grief had made me soft and love had made me stupid, from. Every one of those beliefs was a lever, and I knew where each of them connected. There was one thread, I saw it standing there on the platform, the way you see a single loose stitch in a whole garment and know that if you pull it, from, everything comes apart. My uncles wanted the compensation money. Fine, let them want it. But my father had not only left money, he had left debts. Large ones, from. The borrowings of an honest man who always paid his workers, hundreds of thousands of yuan owed to concrete suppliers and equipment lenders, and 3 different men in the county who had fronted him cash over the years. In the life I remembered, from. Those debts had been quietly buried. The creditors, hearing the eldest brother was dead and the daughter gone, had been paid off cheaply or written off entirely, and my uncles had taken the compensation clean, from. Keeping the 2 halves of my father's estate carefully separate in everyone's mind. The money over here, the debts over there, and never the 2 allowed to touch, but they were not separate. By law, and I had learned the law the hard way, from. In the years after, when it was too late to help me, by law an estate is one thing. You cannot inherit the money and refuse the debts. Whoever takes the assets takes the liabilities. They come as a pair like a man and his shadow, from. My uncles wanted the assets so badly they had bought my boyfriend to get them. So I would let them have the assets. I would simply make very sure that when they closed their hands around my father's 300,000 yuan, from, they were also closing their hands around every last yuan he owed. I would give them the shadow along with the man, and they would sign for it themselves, with their own honest-looking hands in front of the whole village, from, believing right up to the final chop of the seal that they were the ones robbing me. That was the thread. I stood on the cold platform and I pulled gently in my mind to make sure it was real, and I felt the whole garment shift, from. Then I walked home to see my mother and I began to lose. You have to understand the discipline of it. Knowing the future is nothing. Any fool can know a thing. The power is in the patience in moving so slowly and so gently that no one, from, not your enemies and not your allies, ever sees your hand. If I had come home and shouted the truth, I would have lost. My mother would have wept and refused to believe that second uncle, who slipped me candy, would harm us, from. The village would have called me a mad, ungrateful girl, dishonoring her uncles before her father was cold. John would have been warned. The uncles would have moved faster. Grief was expected to make me soft. If I came home hard, from, I would give the whole game away, so I came soft. I came home exactly as broken as they needed me to be. My mother was sitting in the front room in her white morning clothes, and the light through the paper window was thin and cold, and she was folding and unfolding a handkerchief in her lap without seeming to know she was doing it. When she saw me, her face did a complicated thing, surprise, then a fear she tried to hide. "You didn't go," she said. "I couldn't leave you," I said, and I let myself cry, and the crying was not entirely a performance. I didn't leave you here alone, whatever John says, you're all I have left." She held me and we cried together, and over her shoulder I looked at the altar where my father's photograph sat between two guttering candles, and I made him a promise without moving my lips. "Not this time. This time I bury them, and I do it so cleanly that you would be ashamed of me if you knew how cold I've become. Forgive me. I learned it from dying." Second uncle came the next afternoon exactly as I knew he would. He came with oranges. He always came with oranges, as if fruit were a language that could say the things his hands were doing underneath the table. He sat in my father's chair. I noticed that, the way he settled into the dead man's chair without a flicker, and he peeled an orange and gave me the segments one at a time like I was still 6 years old. "Little Mary," he said. "My poor little Mary. Your father, my own brother, gone, it doesn't seem real. And here's the thing I have to be fair about. I think he half meant it. That is what makes men like second uncle dangerous. He was genuinely sad. He genuinely loved his brother, and he was genuinely going to help steal from his brother's child, and he had built a room in his own heart where those two things could sit side by side and never look at each other." "I don't know what to do, second uncle," I said, and I made my voice small. "There's the money coming, the county money, and I don't understand any of it. But never taught me these things. I'm so frightened I'll do something wrong." I watched the relief move across his face, he had come braced for a fight, or at least for a wary girl. Instead, here was a frightened child begging to be led. He had never in his life resisted an easier road. "Don't you worry about a single thing," he said, and he patted my hand, the chosen feeling pat. "That's what family is for. Your third uncle and I will handle all of it. All the papers, all the county men. You just grieve your father and leave the ugly business to us. Would you?" I said, and I let my eyes fill. "I'd be so grateful. I wouldn't know where to begin." "It's already begun," he said, "comfortable now, comfortable enough to be careless. Your third uncle's been to the county twice already. It's all in hand." He smiled. "You have a good cry and let your uncles carry this. It's all in hand. 2 visits to the county already, 11 days after the death, before the widow or the daughter had signed a thing." I filed it away, the way I filed everything now, not with anger, anger is loud, but with the quiet click of a lock turning. He had just told me the machine was running. Good. Let it run. A running machine can be steered. A machine at rest cannot. I gave him a granddaughter's tears and a granddaughter's gratitude, and he left full of the warm feeling of a man who has comforted a child. And the moment his motorbike faded down the lane, I stopped crying as though a tap had been turned, and I went to find where my father kept his papers, My father was not an organized man, but he was a keeping man. He threw nothing away. In the years after, in my first life, I had cursed the chaos of his old tin trunks and cardboard boxes. This time I blessed it because everything I needed was in them, and I had a map of exactly what I was looking for. I spent 3 nights at it by candle after my mother slept. I was looking for the debts. Not the money would come to the county office, and I could not touch that yet. I was looking for the shadow. Every IOU, every loan note, every scrap of paper on which my father had written borrowed in his square, careful hand. They were worse than I remembered, and I had remembered them as ruinous. 110,000 to the concrete works in Fuyang, 60,000 to a man named Old Deng who leased road equipment, 40,000 here, 30 there, small honest borrowings from half the county. My father had owed, all told, something close to 280,000 yuan, 280,000 in debts, 300,000 in compensation. Do you see it now? Do you see the beautiful, terrible arithmetic of it? My father's entire estate, the money and the shadow together, was worth barely 20,000 yuan. A pittance, a used motorbike. My uncles thought they were stealing 300,000. They were, in truth, fighting over the right to inherit a debt that would crush whoever accepted it. They did not know the size of the debts. That was the thing. In my first life, the creditors had been quietly hushed, and the notes had vanished, and everyone had gone on believing the estate was pure gold. Third uncle, for all his careful glasses, had never done the full arithmetic, because my father borrowed from too many small men in too many small amounts, and the paper was scattered across 3 tin trunks in a dead man's storeroom that only a daughter would think to search. I had the paper. I had all of it, and I understood, sitting there in the candlelight with 280,000 yuan of my dead father's honesty spread across the floor, that I was holding the only complete map of the estate that existed in the world. Knowledge again, But knowledge is nothing without patience. If I simply announced the debts, the uncles would recoil. They would refuse the estate, refuse the compensation, let it revert to the widow and the daughter, and then find some slower, dirtier way to bleed us. No. The trap had to close in the other direction. They had to want the estate. They had to fight to take it, publicly with witnesses, from believing it was pure gold. And only after their names were on the papers, and the chop was pressed and the whole village had watched them claim it, only then would the shadow arrive. I copied every debt note by hand, that third night, and I hid the originals where no uncle would think to look, inside the lining of my father's funeral clothes, folded flat against the fabric, because no one in our village would disturb the dead man's garments, Then I sat back on my heels in the guttering light and I let myself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the thing I had not let myself feel since the platform, not triumph, not yet, just the cold, clean certainty of a person who has finally been given the correct tools for a job she was sent back to do. Then I blew out the candle and went to bed, and I slept better than I had slept in 2 lifetimes. Third uncle came on the 5th day, and third uncle was the dangerous one, so I want to slow down here and tell it properly. He came in the morning, when the light was honest, and he came with papers in a good leather folder, and he came without oranges, because third uncle did not believe in softening what could simply be signed. He wore his glasses. He sat, not in my father's chair, he was too careful for that, He sat on the hard bench by the door like a man who did not intend to stay, and he laid the folder on his knees and looked at me the way you look at a sum you intend to solve. Your second uncle tells me you're being sensible, he said. I'm trying, Third uncle good, sensible is good. He opened the folder now. The county, compensation, it's a simple matter, but the paperwork is particular, and your mother, God love her, can't make heads or tails of it, and you're too young to be burdened, So I've had the documents prepared. It assigns the handling of your father's estate to me and your second uncle as the responsible male relatives, which is proper, and which the county expects. You and your mother sign here and here, and you never have to think about any of it again. He held out a pen. He held it out the way John had held out his hand on the ancestral step, the gesture of a person offering you a door that opens onto a cliff. In my first life, a different version of this document had been signed. Not by me, I was already on the train, but by my mother, alone, frightened, trusting the brother-in-law who kept the whole village's accounts. One signature, and the estate had passed to the uncles, and I had died 2 years later in a corridor. I looked at the pen. I looked at third uncle's honest, unnecessary glasses, and I did the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than dying, which at least required nothing of me. I smiled, and I reached for the pen, and I let my hand hover over the page, and then I stopped and I frowned as though a small worry had just occurred to a small girl. Third uncle, I said. Forgive me, I'm stupid about these things, But if you and second uncle take the estate, that means you take everything bar left? That's right, child. So you don't have to everything, I said slowly, as if working it out. So, the money, and the land, and, I let my brow crease. And Ba's debts? He owed some money, didn't he? To the men in Fuyang? I watched him very carefully when I said it. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times. There was a flicker, just a flicker, behind the honest glasses, Third uncle knew there were debts. He did not know how large, and in that flicker I saw him make the same calculation my father's honesty had made possible. That the debts were small, scattered, hushable, and that a girl who mentioned them was not a threat but a convenience, because a girl worried about her father's small debts was a girl eager to hand the whole business to someone else. A few small debts, he said smoothly, nothing for you to worry about. Settle them out of the estate. That's exactly why it's better we handle it. So those men come to us, not to you and your mother. So those men come to us. He had just, without knowing it, agreed to receive every creditor my father ever had. I nearly loved him for it. Oh, I said, flooding with relief. Oh, thank you, third uncle. I was so afraid those men would come and shout at Ma. If you'll take the debts too, then I don't have to be frightened. We take everything, he said, a touch impatient now, wanting the signature. Money and debts, all of it, off your shoulders. Now here, and here. And here is where I made my one real move, the quiet one, the one the whole game turned on. Then can we write that down? I said. He looked at me. I'm sorry, I said, small and earnest and stupid. It's only Ma worries so. If those debt men come, she'll be frightened all over again unless she can show them a paper that says it's your responsibility now, not ours. Could the document just say it plainly? That you and second uncle take the whole estate, the money and every debt, so that any creditor has to go to you? Then Ma can sleep. She can just point them to you and be at peace. I want you to see how small a thing I asked for. I did not ask him to take on anything he had not already agreed to take. I only asked him to write it down in plain words. To a man who believed the debts were trivial, it cost nothing. To a man who wanted the 300,000, it was a small kindness to a frightened widow, and small kindnesses buy signatures. And to third uncle, who lived by the principle that a thing written and chopped was more real than a thing merely said, refusing to put it in writing would have looked like exactly the kind of dishonesty his whole reputation forbade. He hesitated. Even a careful man feels a cold breath sometimes without knowing its source. But he could not name the danger, because the danger was information he did not have, and so he did what men do when they cannot see the trap. He trusted his own cleverness. Of course, he said, if it puts your mother's mind at ease, and he took out his pen and in his own careful square hand, so like my father's they were brothers after all, he added a clause to the document, that the undersigned, second uncle and third uncle, in accepting the estate of the deceased, accepted in full all assets and all liabilities, debts, and obligations of every kind, and that any creditor of the deceased was to seek settlement from them alone. He wrote it to comfort a widow. He wrote it because he believed the liabilities were a few thousand yuan of small village borrowing. He wrote it in front of me, in his own hand, and then he signed it, and then, because third uncle was thorough, because he wanted this closed before any other relative could complicate it. He had second uncle summoned that same afternoon to sign as well, and he called in the village head as witness. The way important documents in our village were always witnessed, so that no one could later say it was done in a corner, and I signed too, and my mother signed. Two frightened women handing their burden to two responsible men, in front of the village head, with red chalk pressed at the bottom. Everyone in that room believed they knew what had just happened. The uncles believed they had just legally captured 300,000 yuan. The village head believed he had witnessed two good brothers taking a fatherless girl's affairs kindly onto their shoulders. My mother believed she had been saved from creditors. Only I knew that third uncle had just signed, in his own careful hand and before a witness, a pressed to pay 280,000 yuan of debt in exchange for 300,000 yuan he was about to discover was not clean at all. I poured the tea. Second uncle liked his strong, third uncle liked his weak, and I made each of them exactly as they liked it, and I set the cups down without a sound, and I waited. The compensation was disbursed 9 days later. 300,000 yuan paid into the account of the estate, now controlled, by a witnessed, chopped, freely signed agreement, by second uncle and third uncle. They had won. For about a week they had genuinely, completely won, and I let them have that week, because a man tastes his loss most sharply right after he has tasted victory. Second uncle bought a new motorbike. Third uncle, more careful, said nothing and moved the money into an account only he could see. They came to visit less. That is how you know men feel guilty. They stopped bringing oranges. The warmth cooled now that the deed was done, and my mother, who did not understand why, grieved a little that her husband's brothers had gone cold, and I held her and said nothing, because she would understand soon enough, and I wanted to be the one holding her when she did. Then I sent the letters. I had copied out the address of every creditor from my father's notes. The concrete works in Fuyang, Old Deng with his road equipment, the 3 men in the county, all of them, and to each one I sent the same short message in my own hand, respectful and grieving, a daughter's dutiful note. My father, whom you knew, has passed. His estate, including all his debts, has been lawfully and fully accepted by my uncles, second uncle and third uncle, as witnessed by the village head and recorded in a signed agreement, a copy of which I enclose. Any monies my late father owed you should now, by that agreement and by law, be sought from them. I am only a daughter and control nothing. They control everything. Please direct all claims to them. I am so sorry for the trouble my father's death has caused you. I enclosed a copy of the clause. Third uncle's own careful handwriting. All liabilities, debts, and obligations of every kind. Then I sat back and I waited, and for the second time in this life I let myself feel 1 clean minute of something, not triumph even now, call it symmetry. The pleasure of a thing balancing that was meant to balance. The creditors came the way rain comes after long heat, first one, then several, then all at once. The concrete work sent a man in a suit with a lawyer's letter for 110,000 yuan. Old Deng came himself on foot, an old hard man who had leased my father equipment for 15 years and wanted his 60,000 and would not be soothed. The 3 county men compared notes and came together, which frightened the uncles most of all, because 3 men together is not a debt, it is a reckoning. I heard about the first meeting secondhand, from a cousin who could not stop laughing as she told it, Old Deng had come to second uncle's house while second uncle was polishing his new motorbike in the yard, and had stood at the gate and named his 60,000 yuan, and second uncle had laughed, and said he knew nothing of any such debt, that any debts of his brothers were a sad, private matter, and old Deng had taken out a copy of the signed agreement, my copy, the one I had sent him, and held it up in the sunlight and read out loud in front of the whole watching lane, from the clause in third uncle's own hand, all liabilities, debts, and obligations of every kind, seek settlement from them alone, witnessed by the village head, chopped, and second uncle had stopped laughing, that is the moment I would have paid my whole first death to see. The moment the warm, funny, orange-bringing man understood that the paper he had signed to steal from a child was in fact a rope, and that he had tied it around his own neck with his own hands in public before a witness, and that the more the money was his, the more the debts were his too, because you cannot cut a shadow away from the man it belongs to, The village turned in a single week, the way a field of wheat turns when the wind changes. That is the part outsiders never understand about a place like ours. Money is money, but face is life, and my uncles had built their whole standing on face. Second uncle's warmth, third uncle's honesty, and now every man in 3 villages knew that the 2 responsible brothers had tried to rob their dead brother's orphan girl, had been so greedy for her compensation that they had signed for debts nearly as large, and were now being chased by creditors down their own lanes. Third uncle, who kept half the village's accounts, lost every client within a month. Who leaves their money with a man exposed as greedy before the whole county? Second uncle sold the new motorbike to make the first payment to old Deng, and it was not nearly enough, and the concrete works lawyer did not care about a motorbike. The 300,000 yuan which they had schemed and paid and lied to capture drained out through the 280,000 of debt in a single season, and when it was gone the debt was not, because 280 is not smaller than 300 by very much, and lawyers and old hard men add interest. I did nothing more. That is what I want you to understand. After the letters, I did nothing at all. I did not need to. I had simply let each of them have exactly what they reached for. The uncles reached for the estate, and I let them close their hands around it, shadow and all. The village reached for a judgment, and I let them read it in third uncle's own honest handwriting. Poetic justice is only this. You arrange it so that a man is destroyed by the precise mechanism he built to destroy you. They wanted to take everything my father left. I made certain they succeeded, and John came back, of course. Word travels, and the word that traveled to the city was that Mary's compensation was 300,000 yuan, and that Mary was unmarried and back in the village and in control of nothing, which meant, to a man like John, that there was still a game to play. He came to the ancestral hall in the evening, the same hour, the same false gentleness, and he sat beside me on the same cold stone step where he had once undone me, and the incense had long since burned to ash, and he took my hand. Mary, he said, I was a fool to get on that train without you. Come to the city with me. We'll marry quietly, just us. Once you're my wife, the money, there is no money, John, I said. I said it very simply, the way you tell a child the shop is closed, and I watched him do the arithmetic, the same arithmetic his mother would one day do in a corridor under a flickering light, in a life he would now never get to ruin, and I watched him understand that the girl beside him controlled nothing worth having, that the estate was underwater, that the uncles who had once paid him 30,000 yuan to take me away were themselves being eaten alive by lawyers. His hand loosened around mine, not all at once, gradually the way water lets go when it drains. And I let him feel the loosening, and then I took my hand back myself gently and folded it in my lap and looked at my father's photograph between the 2 burned-down candles. You paid the uncle's price once, I said, not unkindly. 30,000, wasn't it, to put me on that train. I hope you kept it. You'll want savings. The city is expensive, and your shop never does open. He went very still. I had never told him I knew about the 30,000. In this life no one had told me. I simply knew, the way I knew the number 412, and the number 18,000 and the smell of iron in a corridor. I watched the fear come into his face, the real fear, the kind that has no performance in it, as he understood that the girl beside him knew a thing she could not possibly know and did not know how she knew it, and that made me, for the first time in his life, something he could not calculate. He left without another word. He did not get on a train this time. He simply walked out into the dark, and I let him go, and I did not lift my hand, because there was no longer anything of his in it to show him empty. My mother is asleep in the next rooms as I write this. I can hear her breathing, slow and even, the most valuable sound in the world. She does not know she was ever going to die on the Fuyang Road in the rain. She does not know that a version of her set out one night to save a daughter who was already gone, and never came home. She will live to be old and irritating and to complain that I am too cold, too careful, that I frighten the neighbors' sons. Let her complain for 40 years. Every year of it is a year I bought back from the water. My father's debts are the uncle's debts now, entire and legal and witnessed. The compensation is gone the way I always meant it to go, not into my hands, where it would have made me a target for the rest of my life, but through the debts and out the other side, leaving me with nothing but the one thing worth having, which is my mother alive and my enemies undone and no money at all for anyone to scheme over. You cannot rob a girl who owns nothing. I made myself poor on purpose, and it is the safest I have ever been. I set my father's tea down at the altar every morning now. Strong the way he liked it, though the dead do not drink. I do it because it steadies hands and because it is the one honest thing in a season of careful lies, and because somewhere between one life and the next I made him a promise and I have kept it exactly. The village calls me a good daughter, grieving, dutiful, poor, unlucky, the girl whose greedy uncles took everything and left her with a mother and a debt-drowned name. They pity me. That is the disguise I will wear now, the way third uncle wore his honest glasses. Let them pity me. Pity is the safest thing to be wrapped in. No one guards themselves against a girl they pity, but there is one thing I have not told anyone, and I will tell only you, here, in the dark, with my mother breathing in the next room, from. When old Deng came to collect his 60,000, he could not in the end get it from the uncles, because the uncles were being drained by larger men first. So old Deng came to me, not to demand, he is a hard man but not a cruel one, but to grieve, from. Because he had loved my father, and because he had in a locked box in his house, something that had belonged to my father and that my father had left with him as security 15 years ago, and never redeemed, from. The deed to the mountain land above the Fuyang Road, the land my father bought cheap when he was young, worthless scrub then, forgotten by everyone including my uncles, from. Who fought over 300,000 yuan of compensation and never once thought to ask what else the estate contained. The county is going to widen that road next year. I know this the way I know all things now. They will need that land, from. And they will pay for it, and they will pay a great deal more than 300,000 yuan. Old Dung gave me the deed. Quietly, in exchange for a promise that when the county money comes his 60,000 is the first thing paid, before anything, from. Before I keep and yuan for myself. I gave him my word, and old Dung knew my father, and a daughter's word given to an old man who knew her father is not a thing you break so. Let the village pity the poor good daughter, from. Let the uncles drown in a debt they signed for with their own honest hands. Let John walk into the dark and stay there. I own nothing anyone knows about, and one deed no one remembers, from. To a strip of scrubland above the road that killed my father, the same road that took him and would have taken my mother, and, in a way, took me. Next year the county comes to widen it. I will be waiting, from, with my father's tea going cold on the altar, and my mother complaining in the next room and my hands, for the third time in 2 lives, perfectly steady.